Hello and welcome back to our cottage garden and wishing you a happy new year. It's time for our yearly recap video and we can reflect on how everything went this year, what went well, what didn't go well, the things we've learnt. And I've spent some time writing everything down in my notebook, so hopefully I'll remember everything. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, those of you that have joined us this year and helped us grow the channel. This is our second full year doing YouTube and we're really looking forward to the third one. I still feel like as a garden we are in the kind of early stages of getting everything established. Even though we've been here for 5 years, I think just through the nature of the first few years being clearing things out and building things, it felt like we were only really able to get started on actually planting a couple of years ago. So in that sense, the way that we're gardening and the things we've been growing are all quite new. So I feel like there have been loads of developments this year, and actually I didn't realise how much we'd done until I combed through all of the videos and my notes and my photos and put it all in one place, and then I thought, oh my goodness, no wonder I'm feeling tired. But I highly recommend doing this if you do have time or if you're stuck for things to do. Comb through all of the photos you've taken of your garden and write down what you've done and the things you were proud of and the things you've learned, and I think it's quite an eye-opening experience. And before we start, I also need to say a huge thank you to those of you that have joined us on Patreon this year. Your support's been absolutely amazing and you've bought us so many wonderful plants for the garden, including this lovely hellebore that's next to me, which is looking gorgeous right now. So without further ado, let's start with January. January was really wet and cold, and this is the theme that runs throughout the whole year. It's been quite difficult just maintaining the grass because it's been so wet. But in January we did have quite a lot of frosts, and actually we were able to go ice skating in fields around the village because it had rained so much and then flooded and frozen. So we really enjoyed that, being out and about, but it made gardening quite difficult. And one thing I really want to do in January is to build up a stock of hellebores and those really early flowering bulbs like Iris reticulata and snowdrops, because I think it is a miserable time of year. And I find getting out here and just seeing a hellebore like that is absolutely amazing. You can feel your brain exploding in a really wonderful way when you see things like that. So my mission has been in January to build our stock of hellebores up. And I think last year we added quite a few, perhaps between 10 and 20, and they do take a little while to grow, but I'm looking around now and I can see lots of them popping up, so I'm really pleased we did that. I was more organised in January than I will be this year, and I had all my seeds sorted out and I planned the year ahead. This year I'm just going to go with the flow. I don't think I've got time to be that organised, but I did enjoy it. In a similar vein, February is a time where most things are died back. It's a really good time for looking around the garden and thinking about the structural changes that you want to make or plants that you want to add. That time of year I really rely on the tiny little gems around the garden and tiny pops of colour, and I think it's all about zooming in and heroing things like hellebores, snowdrops and Iris reticulata, and we had some lovely flowers. It was the first year of our introducing snowdrops to the garden, and I was a little bit disappointed with how that went, because in the autumn before I had added maybe 300 snowdrop bulbs and I think only about 10% of them actually flowered, and I have been told that it's hard to get them going and they do take a while, so I'm hoping the 10% that flowered will continue to multiply, and I have been adding more both in autumn and spring, but it was a little bit disappointing after the efforts in autumn. But the hellebores looked absolutely incredible. Me and my mother-in-law took a trip to Ashwood Nurseries, which are known for their hellebores, and we had a hellebore tour and it was absolutely amazing. The colours were incredible. I brought a couple of them home with me, including one really gorgeous yellow evolution variety and a green one as well. I hadn't had either of those colours, so I was really excited to see them, and I think that trip to the nursery was the highlight of February for me, and I'm really hoping that I can go again this year. We will see. It's not super near to where we live, but I do hope to visit again. Towards the end of February, it felt like the momentum was really building up, and I feel such a sense of relief when I see those crocuses coming through the grass again. So we had the earliest crocuses, which were called Firefly, flowering in the grass, really pale pink, kind of small crocus. But it was lovely to see those and see those early bees that are waking up as well. And then the ducks start laying, and it feels like you can really sense the days getting longer, the temperature's warming up. and it's just a reassuring time. You feel like you're regaining your energy and ready to get back stuck into the garden year. I started my seedlings quite early, so in February I was sowing things like tomatoes, aubergines, the cup and saucer vine. I sowed them on our dining room table and I used heat mats and grow lights, and this year I'm not going to bother. It was amazing and I had beautiful tomatoes this year, but I'm going to try and just plant with the garden as things warm up and compare the 2 years, see how that goes. March was an absolutely beautiful month. It was amazing. So at the start of March we had our crocus lawn flowering, and that is probably about 1,000 Pickwick bulbs in the lawn, and we had really gorgeous sun, and just seeing the bees moving between the bulbs and the light shining through the petals was the most beautiful thing. I absolutely love that time of year. The ducks were laying quite consistently as well, so I had a really nice routine of walking up the garden with a basket, admiring the crocuses, collecting their eggs, and then going inside and having a nice cooked breakfast. We also had our white Dutch crocuses flowering in the grass around me here, and that was really, really beautiful, and some smaller white crocuses in the beds and the borders as well. A magical time seeing everything come back to life, and it's also not too overwhelming because you're not overrun with weeds and things that need cutting back, and it's just new life and those spring bulbs giving you colour. So I think if I had to choose one time that is my favourite, I would say it's probably March. The most amazing thing that happened in March was that we found out we were going to be on Gardeners World, and within a few weeks of finding out, they were here to film, and they said, which time of year do you think would be the best to show in your garden? And honestly, I think it probably would have been end of February, early March with the crocuses flowering, but we didn't get things ready quite in time for that, so we decided to go for the tulips instead, and we arranged for that to be filmed in April, but the ball really got rolling in March, and so I was quite nervous. I was tidying things up like a bit of a madman, and lots of imposter syndrome and worrying about am I going to be good enough, what's it going to look like when someone else is in control of filming the garden when I normally film it myself. All of the things that are probably quite normal to worry about if you're going to be on TV to an audience of 2 million people. Quite terrifying, but they were lovely and they sort of held my hand throughout the whole process, and we were so grateful to be able to do it. So that was March, and what an amazing month it was. April, another jam-packed month, and again one I'm looking at and I am thinking, how on earth did we do so much? And no wonder I'm feeling burnt out. But it was beautiful. A few exciting things happened in April. The first one was that we were finally allowed to let the ducks out in the garden again after they went through their flock down. So in the UK we have to lock them away over the winter when the risk of avian flu is high. But last year it was a really long time. It was from October into April, so it was almost half a year, and the ducks were absolutely sick of it by the end. In the winter they don't mind, they want to just be snug and cozy and stay in the barn anyway, but as we move into spring and the days warm up, they really want to be out here foraging, and their energy is building up and they don't like being cooped up in a pen. So it was great to get them outside again, and while that was happening we had a beautiful backdrop of tulips, and I topped up the tulips, but most of them were returning because I'd planted them about 3 years ago and they've come back every year. So it's kind of a low effort, high reward scenario, which is absolutely lovely. And then I also have my cutting patch down there where I grow the double petaled varieties. They weren't quite flowering in April, but they were just starting to get to that really exciting stage when you can see a little bit of colour, a bit of green, a kind of head on the top of the bulb, and it's just a time that's full of excitement. I was able to move my seedlings outdoors because we'd had the last frost, and that was another step of sort of momentum building towards the summer months. And we introduced a lot of new perennial plants to the garden as well once the soil was nice and warm. Then I did a polyculture course with Alice Fowler, and that was absolutely amazing. It was really lovely to be among people that had kind of similar hobbies and a love for gardens, and that was wonderful. I really loved it. And then finally, at the end of April, we filmed Gardeners World, which was another incredible but exhausting experience. So I think they were here for about 10 hours filming to make a segment that was about 13-14 minutes long, and they did such a beautiful job. I feel like they asked really lovely questions and they helped me tell my story, and for those of you that haven't watched it, it focused on being a late diagnosed autistic adult and having a kind of sensory haven in the garden and using that space to nourish yourself when you get burnt out from the outside world. that was really exciting, but it was very nerve-wracking, and especially after we'd finished filming, I think I was second guessing myself a lot and hoping that I'd said the right thing and hoping that it would come across in a nice way. So I just tried to distract myself in between filming it and it being on the TV. But it was absolutely wonderful, really lovely team, really enjoyed the day and needed a lot of rest afterwards. And that was April. What an insane month that was. So May was kind of a month of burnout for me more than anything, and I had COVID, which wiped me out for half of the month. The best I could have asked for was just getting myself in the garden and looking at things, but there was a lot to look at and it is such a gorgeous time. And May is quite a low maintenance month for us because we try and do no-mow May as much as we can throughout the garden. We let the grass grow really long and anything that wants to grow in it can. In the orchard we get this really beautiful cow parsley that's soft and billowy, and the way it moves in the wind is absolutely lovely. And obviously we were allowed the ducks out again, so they were venturing around the garden too. I think May is probably my second favourite month to look at in the garden after March. So much fresh, lovely green colours, but you're not overwhelmed with the vigorous growth that you get in summer. So it feels quite comforting while it's still beautiful. I had the mini meadow flower at the end of April, start of May, and that was the first year the mini meadow had flowered. It was really beautiful, if not slightly disappointing, because again, I think about half of the bulbs or less that I had planted had actually flowered, but I hope that they will drop some seed and spread, and over the years it will build up. And I have topped it up loads this autumn, so once we get to May this year, I'm hoping it will look a bit more impressive. I think my favourite flowers in May were Linaria that I planted in this border here, and they were the more modern varieties. So one of them's called Peachy. I can't remember the name of the second variety that I planted, but it was such a beautiful kind of purpley blue pinkish colour, almost pearl type colour, and it was so soft and gentle, and the way it moved in the wind was absolutely stunning. And it seemed like it flowered for a really, really long time as well. So that's something that I'm definitely going to grow more of. We also had the irises flowering really well this year. It was probably the second year they flowered. I think I planted them about 4 years ago when we first moved in, and they are a soft purple kind of blue colour, and the way the sun shines through the petals, it looks glittery and it's the most beautiful thing. So I really, really loved seeing those in this border. It was a little bit patchy, so I'm going to continue to build it up, but a beautiful month. In June, our episode of Gardener's World finally aired. I say finally, it was really quick. We filmed it at the end of April and then it was on TV in June. I can't remember the exact date, but it was such a fast turnaround. And we only heard a couple of weeks prior to that it was going to go live that early. We were told that it could be as long as a year wait, and we wouldn't find out until they had scheduled it into the programme with a couple of weeks notice. That was really exciting. We watched it with my family. I think they did a really lovely job. It's kind of hard to come up with the words for how I felt, but it was such a lovely experience, and so grateful for how they told our story. There was such an amazing outpouring of love after it was on the TV, and people sending messages saying that they themselves had just realised that they have autism, or that they've been through a similar journey, or even if they had other difficulties like depression or anxiety, understanding how a garden can help deal with those on a day-to-day basis. It just felt like such a nice kind of community outpouring of love, and it was amazing. In the garden, probably the main event was the roses, and our roses are all still quite young, between 1 and 4 years, I would say. Every year is quite exciting. We had a rose called Seagull or Rambling Rector, and it was the first year it flowered. It was a single petaled white variety, and it's a rambler, so it can grow quite vigorously up through trees, and I'm climbing it through a plum tree, and the flowers were stunning. I am so glad that I planted it, but also it's one that the pollinators really love too, and I'm looking at it right now. It's covered in rose hips. Really loved that one. And then of course the old favourites like Olivia Rose Austin, beautiful soft pink colours, and other David Austin roses. We've got Emily Bronte, Sceptred Isle, and Desdemona, Generous Gardener. I love David Austin roses, and anything with a soft pastel colour is something that I want to grow in my garden. We also had really lovely displays of alliums, foxgloves, geraniums, and other summer flowering perennials too. I know a lot of people say that June is the best month for cottage gardens, and I can see why. It's probably my third favourite. But June was beautiful and exciting and tiring all at the same time. I think one thing you'll notice about July, if you've watched our videos for a while, is that it was a very green month, and usually, or at least for the last couple of Julys, we've had quite strong droughts and the grass has kind of gone yellow and the garden just looks crispy and dead. This July it was lush, green everywhere. We had so much rain, it was really easy to water things. It was frustrating having so much rain because July is a time that you want to be outside and you want to be soaking up the sun, and we just didn't have a lot of it. And I remember filming videos in July and getting rained off halfway and having to wrap them up really quickly and then run inside. I'd say in terms of flowers, it feels like it's kind of a transitional month where you have things dying back after that first summer flush. So we had lavender, but other than that, there wasn't loads going on, maybe a few pops of roses here or there, but it wasn't as impressive as June. But it does feel for me like July is a time where I really transition from thinking about flowers to thinking about food. So we had our first tomato harvests at the end of July, and that did feel quite late to me. We had really early blackberries this year, so we harvested some of those, and we had some peaches from our peach tree in the greenhouse behind me. They were beautiful, although we only had 3 or 4 because it's quite young. One of the things that we really struggled with this July, and it was new to us, were box moth caterpillar. So as soon as I saw them, I had a huge panic, and I was trying to decide, do I try and tackle these? Do I get rid of the hedges? And I did a mix, so I got rid of all of the small hedges and I tried to preserve the larger ones. So anything bigger than about this size stayed, anything smaller went. I did also decide to replace the ones I got rid of with things that won't be attacked by caterpillars. So I've got lots of Japanese holly now and some ligustrum as well, which you might be able to see next to me. So it was somewhat panicky, but I really appreciated those of you that gave advice about that and shared your stories too. It seems like everyone has different ideas about what's right. So I think maybe just a hybrid approach is what we're doing for now. I also planted a new shade border in July with some hydrangeas, some Japanese anemones and a few more hellebores. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that flower in the coming summer because it was quite small and unimpressive when I planted it. So the start of August, I wasn't actually in the garden that much. It was my 30th birthday and I reconnected with loads of friends that I've met over the years, and it was absolutely amazing to meet people that I went to uni with and hadn't seen for years. It was really beautiful. I loved spending time with so many amazing people, but again, I did burn myself out, so I didn't have a lot of energy for gardening, and after that I was happy, but I had to spend quite a few days in bed to recover. But when I did eventually make it out back to the garden, there were incredible tomatoes and aubergines and damsons, and the harvests were so beautiful. They were kind of purpley and red, really rich colours. Absolutely no sign of blight on the tomatoes. It felt very easy and rewarding to harvest everything in August. After I'd done that, I preserved the harvest, so I made loads of pasta sauces, I pickled the cucumbers, and I made damson jam as well, which took a really long time, but it was incredible, and I'm hoping that we'll have another good harvest of those again this year. The biggest transformation in the garden in August was we had some lovely people come and help fix the pond for us. So they drained it, they removed the old lining and they relined it with something that's supposed to last for a lifetime. And they did say they spotted so many holes in the old liner, and it was made of that really poor quality kind of plastic stuff that you might use to cover parts of the garden, but it's not really something you would use to make a pond with. So they said that it was in a state of disrepair, and I think it was amazing that it even had any water in at all. But to have it relined and then filled again, it looked absolutely incredible. And they used some of the old flagstones from our house that were damaged, and we had to remove them to build tiny little steps so that if anything falls in, say a hedgehog, it will have an escape route so that it won't drown. And it was so fast that we saw things return to the pond, and we saw frogs and newts and dragonflies, and We have never seen frogs in the pond before, and I assume because the water levels were so low, there wasn't really access for things to get in and out easily. Life came back so quickly and at such a higher volume. So I'm really looking forward to planting the pond up next year. September was the peak of our tomato plants and they looked absolutely stunning. They were so beautiful. Again, no signs of blight, which was surprising because it was such a damp year. We really thought that we'd get blight this year, but it wasn't until October that it finally reached us. So we had a really good year for tomatoes. We had a few things flowering in the garden, so the perennial sunflowers looked really lovely this year. We also had our cup and saucer vines finally flower in September, which felt really late considering that I sowed them back in January or February on the dining room table. I also started a humongous bulb planting effort in September, and initially I didn't want to do that many, but I had news of a project that we're going to be working on for the next year, and I wanted to have some really impactful parts of the garden so that I can have a bit of wow factor while I'm working on that. So I did a couple of thousand bulbs in the mini meadow in front of me. I did a few hundred crocuses. I topped everything up. I planted tulips in the cutting patch, snowdrops, about 300 iris reticulata in a bed down there, so that should look really lovely soon. I added loads of woodland anemones. I just can't wait to see what happens, but I'm quite nervous because it feels like the stakes are high and I want it to look really good. So keep your fingers crossed for spring and remember to subscribe if you'd like to see how it turns out. And that is September. So October was a month for structural changes in the garden. The first thing that we did was Aaron's friend helped us trim some branches from the larger trees, including the oak tree that's next to me and the elder tree on the other side of me, and that let so much more light into the garden and really opened up the space. And then I used the logs from the oak tree to start growing mushrooms as well, which is a completely new thing to me. I'm growing lion's mane, and I did run out of time, so I was hoping to do about 6 logs and I only got 2 made in the end. I was just too much going on, but I'm still really looking forward to seeing what happens with those 2, and next year I will add to the collection, and I'm just really excited about that. After we'd got the trees cut back, we removed the trellises that we had as fencing on either side of the garden, and it felt amazing to get rid of them because they just weren't working. The idea was that they would eventually become screened with roses and clematis and other climbers, and some evergreen climbers as well, but it just wasn't working out and they looked really gappy and unsightly, and we put in these hazel hurdles instead, which are probably not going to last as long. Hopefully we'll get 5 years out of them, but they look absolutely stunning and they give us a lot of privacy, and we're really happy with them. One thing that I did notice was that I would like to add some more late flowering perennials to the garden. I think I said this last year too, and I have started building up a stock of Japanese anemones, but it's taking a while for them to really get established. Hopefully this coming October we will have a few more flowers to look at, but it's definitely something that's kind of on my mental list to work on in the garden. I also started cleaning the greenhouses, something I haven't finished yet, and I planted my garlic as well, which is quite early for me, but I just wanted to get on top of it because I knew that I had a lot to work on over the autumn and winter. I was really pleased to harvest my first bit of saffron from the saffron crocuses that I added to the greenhouse behind me. That felt really exciting, and it was like opening up a whole new world of growing crocuses at a second interval in the year. You know, I love growing them in spring, but growing them in autumn was a new thing for me and something that I want to do more of. So November is a time when the slowness kind of starts to creep in. I always do a big bulb planting kind of session in October and sometimes even November and December, but I can feel myself getting tired, and you can see the ducks kind of stop laying, they start molting, lots of things die back around the garden and the leaves are dropped, and it's just a sign that it's time to rest and slow down. So it was about noticing the colours changing around the garden, tidying up the leaves as they fell on the grass, planting a few things like some broad beans, but not a lot of work. And it felt like it was really nice to just sit out here and enjoy the new opened up space since we cut down the branches of the trees and since we've got these new hazel hurdles up. And it was just a good time to kind of reflect on the things that we'd worked on the month before, and watching the transitional time in the garden between the seasons. We had a few frosts around the garden, but overall it's been so warm this winter. I think we've only had 2 frosts, and then me and Aaron went on holiday to Cornwall as well, so we weren't here for the whole month, but we had a really lovely break and enjoyed the sense of slowing down. December again was a time of slowness, and the days were really short. It was getting dark around 4:10 here, and I'm someone that wakes up late. There wasn't a lot of useful time in the garden, and we have had such miserable weather. We hadn't really had any frosts throughout December, but we had a lot of rain, and so the ground's been really sludgy, and it's not been particularly nice for gardening. The good thing though was that the ducks have still been allowed out. They didn't have to go into an early lockdown this year, so it's been really lovely watching them enjoy the garden all the way through Christmas, and I know that they've been really grateful for that. I've started mulching the soil, so part of that was continuing to move leaves onto the borders and off the grass to mulch the areas around me up here. And then I did a humongous duck clear out, and I cleared about 10 wheelbarrows of partially composted duck mess from the barn, and I added that to the raised beds at the top of the garden to give them some kind of protection, but also to give some nutrients back to the soil for when we grow food next year. I think it's quite normal that anyone who plants bulbs in their garden has a box that just stays on the table far later than they want it to. So in December I finally got out here and put the last bulbs in. So there were a few tulips that I forgot to add, and some daffodils, but I did manage to get everything in, and I think we got to about 3,200 bulbs this year, all of which should return year on year and spread, so that's really amazing. Another job I did in December was changing the edging on these borders. We had some handmade bamboo edging that we put together, I think in 2020 or 2021, that had completely disintegrated and become overgrown with weeds. So I replaced that with a metal edging, and it still looks a bit messy because I haven't had the chance to top up the grass seeds where it meets the lawn. I'm trying to get some turf, but in winter nowhere sells it. But it was good to get that done and good to get on top of another job. And then finally at the end of December we had life appearing in the form of hellebores, and that's just getting better and better by the day, so I can't wait to see those through January. But that's the year in a nutshell. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey, and please do subscribe if you'd like to see what happens in our 3rd year of doing YouTube. Can't wait to share it with you and to see what happens. But thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.